After the miracle, rather than hanging around to enjoy the fame or gain power, Jesus retreated to a place all by himself. He dismissed the crowd and sent his disciples in a boat to the other side of the lake. It seems like Jesus was there all night, praying alone, as he was recorded doing a number of times during the Bible. Meanwhile, it seems the disciples were trying to get across the lake, struggling against the wind. Again, all night. They had just witnessed a miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, and then not many hours later, they were in a storm. I wonder what they must have been thinking, how they must have felt. Did they feel fear? Did they pray? Or were they calm? Maybe they felt disappointed after they'd just witnessed this amazing miracle. They were back in times of trouble. We can only imagine. Also, I thought they know Jesus is nearby, so why shouldn't they just know to call out to him in a time of need? In these dark, early hours of the morning, when all must have felt hopeless, Jesus approached them walking on the water. Their first reaction was fear. They were terrified because at that point, they didn't even see it was Jesus. They didn't recognise him at all, even thinking he was a ghost. I wonder at this point why they assume it's a ghost first. Shouldn't they recognise Jesus? They've been with him for a while now. As they call out in fear, Jesus responded immediately. And once they knew who it was and remembered he was with them, their fear faded away. Once they recognised Jesus' voice, once they knew it was him. And what did he say? Take courage, it's me. Don't be afraid. After battling against the wind, then being scared by a figure walking towards them on the water, those words must have been a great relief to hear. In verse 28, Peter asks Jesus to call him out to walk on the water. At first glance, this might seem like a strange thing to be asking. Or our first thought might be, what on earth is he thinking? Where did he get that idea from? Is Jesus just trying to get in on the act? Is Peter just trying to get in on the act, trying to share the power and the attention? Is it just a hasty, knee-jerk reaction? An impulsive moment? A childish act of enthusiasm? It reminds me of like, I will, me, let me do it. Or was it a genuine act of faith? Peter took a step of faith after checking it was okay with Jesus. If it's you, call me. If it's you, Jesus, I'll do it. And yes, it might appear that that step of faith failed, but glass half full. He took steps on water. Something that I'd hope he would never have forgotten. Something that showed him and the others witnessing it that Jesus was more than human. He is the Son of God. In my mind, I think he took a huge risk here. Imagine stepping out after wanting to join in with Jesus, stepping out of the boat and immediately sinking. That would be my fear. How would that look? People would laugh at him, and it would surely cast doubt on who Jesus was. If he'd just stayed in the boat, he could have continued following Jesus without question. Peter takes a huge risk, steps out to walk on the water, steps out to follow Jesus. I wanted to focus on that first and foremost, that it wasn't a failure. He took the steps and experienced what it was like to trust in Jesus fully. But let's not completely ignore the sinking part. The part where doubt seemed to creep in. The part where, even though he'd had this amazing experience and confirmation that this man Jesus was something special, doubt still crept in. When Peter focused back on the wind, on the danger around him, literally taking his eyes off Jesus and focusing on his situation, He began to revert back to human ability. He began to sink. As he cried out for help, Jesus helped. Notice that from the passage we see Jesus does point out that Peter has little faith and questions why he doubted. But Jesus still catches him. Peter does need to realise that he did lack faith and that he did doubt, and hopefully see the difference between the two. Notice that when he took his eyes off Jesus, things changed. But notice that that was not the end of his story. Jesus was still with him and had a plan for his life which still rolled on. The sinking part was a lesson. Well, the walking part was a lesson too. A part of how Peter gets from being a fisherman to a true follower of Jesus, and then to a fisher of men. Just want to point out as well, I thought I had it on here, but the other disciples stayed safely in that boat, didn't they? They didn't get to experience what he did. I think that's an important part too. So based on what we've heard today, what does that mean for us? What difference could knowing this story make in our lives? Is there a command to obey, an example to follow, or a promise to claim? What is the good news? A few things that came out for me was, first of all, you've got Jesus' model of prayer, that example of prayer. If Jesus is the Son of God and is God, and he takes that time, what does that say for us? Another part is the storm. We could see that as our struggles, as our day-to-day busyness. What is our storm or our struggle at the moment? And where do we see God in this? Is he far, far away from it? Is his face turned away from us, or is he part of it? Do we communicate with him? Is he with us in that time? Do we allow him to be with us? The other thing is when they didn't recognise Jesus. So how do we recognise Jesus, his path for our life? How do we hear his voice? How do we know it's him? Where in our lives do we need to step out in faith? Do we take risks for God? There's lots of things we could be doing in the week, people we might want to speak to about God, and we perhaps feel scared to do so. Are we allowing that fear and doubt to lead us? Or do we turn to God? On my prayer app this week, it talked about Charles Colson, known as Chuck as well, who was the chief counsel to President Nixon. He was involved in some serious scandal that meant he did some time in prison. But despite this, something amazing came out of it. He founded a ministry called Prison Fellowship, with a mission to show Christ's love to prisoners by coming alongside them and supporting them. In his book, he talks about a time when he went back to a prison for to celebrate Prison Fellowship. And in his book, Loving God, he said this: "As I sat on the platform waiting my turn at the pulpit, my mind began to drift back in time to scholarships and honours earned, cases argued and won, great decisions made from lofty government offices. My life had been the great American dream fulfilled. But all at once, I realised that this is not my success God had used to enable me to help these prisoners, or hundreds of others just like it. My life of success was not what made this morning so glorious. All my achievements meant nothing in God's economy. The real legacy of my life was my biggest failure, that I was an ex-convict. My greatest humiliation, being sent to prison, was the beginning of God's greatest use of my life. He chose the one thing in which I could not glory for his glory." Confronted with this staggering truth, I discovered in those few moments in the prison chapel that my world was turned upside down. I understood with a jolt that I had been looking at life backward. But now I could see. Only when I lost everything that I thought made Chuck Colson a great guy had I found the true self God intended me to be and the true purpose of my life. It goes on to say it's not what we do that matters, but what the sovereign God chooses to do through us. The reason I'm sharing that is the thing that I've taken from this reading. The three words that kept coming out to me was fear, doubt, and faith. Fear, failure, sin, difficulties, all these things are the storms of our lives that help doubt creep in. All these things and more often cloud our lives and contribute to the loss of faith, especially when we don't admit our mistakes or sin, or we don't believe we are forgiven. We focus on the ifs and buts. We stay in the boat, afraid of failing. We focus on the busyness of life and our comforts, taking our eyes off Jesus. Peter was walking on the water, which was utterly amazing, but then he sinks. Then he needs help again. He is reminded to rely on God. And so, Colson reminded that God is still in control and has a plan for our lives. A plan that is unimaginable to us. And God works through us in times and circumstances we would never expect him to. I've had a bit of an incident recently. It's nothing massive, it was just with my son. We've prayed about something and it seemed to come true. You know, God seemed to answer our prayer. And then it was backed up by some difficulties for him, which I was confused about. Then we prayed again, it seemed to pick up again, and then it seemed to step back again. And it's that feeling that, where is God in that? But I did feel that God was in control of it. We don't know where it's going to lead, but I do feel that God was in control. True faith can take away our fears, or at least put them into perspective. When we think we are failing, or circumstances seem impossible, God is still at work. Hold on to that. Hear Jesus' words over your situation, or whatever storm is around you. Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid.